Welcome to ABA on Tap. I'm Mike Rubio with Dan Lowry. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and always analyze responsibly. All right. And welcome back to yet another installment of ABA on Tap. I am your ever grateful co-host, Mike Rubio, along with Mr. Daniel Lowry. Mr. Dan, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. How you doing, man?
I am super excited.
I know, and we say that all the time, but sometimes just a little more excited than other times, and this is one of those times.
So, I play music. My son's an aspiring musician, and you sort of admire certain musicians, and you grow up with, posters on your wall. So if I had ABA posters on my wall, today's guest, there would be a poster of her for sure. She does all the stuff that I'm interested in. I can't wait to learn more about her origin story. And I always introduce myself as the ever grateful co-host, and I am ever grateful today to have Dr. Yev Veverka. Dr. Yev, thank you so much for your time on a Sunday morning. And thank you for your flexibility in changing your time. We had some scheduling changes, and you were right there with us. How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. It's nice to be here earlier,
Good.
Looking outside at the sunny Seattle weather, and excited to chat with you all while watching all the spring happenings outside. So doing great.
You got to cherish those sunny Seattle days, right? Because they're few and far between.
Right. Everybody's out today. It's so funny. Everybody comes out of the woodwork when the rain stops.
We're going to get you back out there, and hopefully it's not like one of those comedy films where as soon as you step out, then the Seattle rain starts again or something like that. So we'll get you back out there, and I promise these 2 hours will fly. We've got so much ground to cover. We like to start with the origin story. We're going to cover, we kind of talked about this before hitting the record button, but feeding intervention and early childhood integration or inclusion, and then the general idea of compassion. And we're so excited to learn from you on all these topics. But tell us how it all got started for you, and then right up to where it culminates now, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah. It's a long story, I guess. And I think that everybody has like a non-traditional path to where they are in
We
this
love it.
field. So maybe it's not non-traditional. But I started working in the field of ABA right out of undergrad. I took a class with Dr. Eric Larson just by happenstance. Had never heard of applied behavior analysis. I worked in an after-school program with kids with disabilities, but didn't really know anything about ABA. And as soon as I took that class, I just fell in love with the field. So I went right in from undergrad into my career.
Thanks.
And knew nothing, as we all have as BTs. And this was back in like that time of before insurance coverage, and when we would be hired by families, and then there's like this outside BCBA. So there was a lot of time on my own trying to figure things out, and which leads me to kind of how I got into feeding and mealtime support. So I noticed that all of the families I was working with as a BT, I was at this point of thinking about my master's program. I was still very early. And as a BT, I noticed that everybody was dealing with some feeding challenges. And when I say everybody, like, I mean, literally every single client I worked with had some sort of feeding challenge, and I knew nothing about it. So I started my master's program, and in that time told my advisor and my instructors that I want to learn more about this. And they said, well, start reading the literature and start going to the conferences. And so I did that. And I'll talk, I'm sure, later about all the mistakes I made, because I think that's what led me to this. But one of the mistakes I made is the literature I absorbed was all behavioral, and the conferences I went to were all behavioral, and feeding is so much more than that. And so I was watching these conference talks and reading these articles where the results were so great. And I was like, oh, I want to replicate that. And so that's what I did for my capstone and as part of my work as a behavior tech. And I always tell people it worked and that the data looked good. Kids were eating more foods. But as far as how few people felt about it and how I felt about it, like kids were running away from the door instead of running
Mm,
to me when I was used to them running to me and ready to play. And parents weren't sure, but they really wanted their kid to eat more. And kids were crying at the table, but the intervention worked. It was effective. And I got to this point where I was like, I don't like this. This doesn't feel like the ABA that I fell in love with. And like, what do I do from here? So I finished my master's program. This is a really long story. Should I keep going?
please. Oh,
Yeah,
we are soaking up every word.
Okay. It's like this is like 20 years now.
I've got like 50 questions already. This guy's great at questions. Oh, you're just feeding in the flame. Don't worry. Go
Okay,
ahead.
great.
Yeah.
Okay. So finished my master's program with that knowledge, still was really interested, but not feeling good. Came to my incredible mentor and doctoral advisor, Dr. Eileen Schwartz, who I was so honored that she said I could work with her, but I chose to come to the University of Washington because I wanted to learn more from her and her work on inclusion and working with children kind of where they're at and like this early intervention and support model of kids with and without disabilities working together. So I was like, okay, maybe I can get something from this that will kind of feed in. I use a lot of unintentional puns.
Pun
Feed into
intended.
the yes, the feeding work I was doing. And so I asked her what to do, and she sent me to this like intensive, interdisciplinary, really comprehensive feeding program. And I learned so much from the like nutrition fields there, the nurses, the speech language pathologists, and all the medical providers. And at the same time, I was still seeing this like trends that I felt uncomfortable with, where by the time kids were coming in, they were like 7, 8, 9 years old, sometimes
Mm,
older. And they were at this point of like, I always tell this story of this kid that was eating Lucky Charms marshmallows, only the marshmallows, drinking some milk and eating like some goldfish crackers. And his family was buying them in bulk. And I watched an escape extinction procedure. And again, it worked and I was standing there
yeah.
behind the
Yeah.
glass and he was crying and he vomited and he stripped down and at the end he ate a bite of whatever it was that the goal was and the person that was running the program is brilliant everything I say like it's not putting blame anywhere. People
Sure.
were doing the
We
best they could
Sure.
with
Oh, we understand
with
exactly what
yeah
you're talking about.
with
I
the
can think back
information
in
we had.
my career and think of all those things that I did and
Right.
went like, oh, I should have done that.
For sure. Yeah. So this is said without judgment, but she
Absolutely.
said, sometimes this is really hard to watch and it's the only way. And I was just like, but is it? Is it the only way? So I went back to Eileen and I said, is this the only way? Because I know that these parents did not start solids with Lucky Charms marshmallows. Like, how did we get to this point from
Interesting.
like transitioning from bottle, starting solids, eating at school to we eat three things? And she, if anybody knows Eileen, like they can picture this, but she kind of was like, well, figure that out. That's your doctoral work right there. It's like, figure it out. How? And she introduced me to so many people that I'm so grateful for that were practitioners in the field.
Mhm.
And they were working at the early learning the developmental preschool at the University of Washington, where Eileen directed the program. And so I started talking to practitioners, not researchers, not ABA folks that are
Yeah.
doing writing up their studies, but people who are in the classrooms working with kids all the time. And we started asking families and kind of going back in time to figure that out. And what we learned was that families were not getting the education they needed.
Yeah.
People who eat with kids, so teachers, child care providers, birth to three providers, did not know about pediatric feeding and feeding development and what's a red flag and what's not. And they were stressed. And the wait lists were crazy long. And so by the time something was flagged as bad enough to be referred, then they had to wait for another 2 years. So we're having like this 2, 3-year-old saying like, oh, this is concerning, being told this is normal, just
Wait it
wait it
out.
out.
Give it time to play out.
Exactly. And by the time they get on that wait list, they wait 2 more years. And by the time they come in, they're eating the Lucky Charms marshmallows and they've dropped everything else and require a super intensive program. So that's how this all culminates. I've really taken on working with practitioners I love working in early intervention and with early support providers, but also with just like your general preschool teachers. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be autism specific or developmental disability specific, but really asking the question of like, what are some universal things that everybody should know to
Mm.
prevent this from happening?
Wow, that's an incredible journey. University of Washington, a really strong psych, behavior, neuroscience tradition in general. Is that Geraldine Dawson? I know
She was there, yeah. I
yeah,
never
she
got
was
to,
there because she was part of the Early Start Denver model, which I
that's
know
right.
started out of University of Denver, but then she became involved. I have a great admiration for her work in the sense that as a developmentalist myself, and then I did my graduate work in neuroscience and neuroimaging, and she was also very well published in that field. So it gave me hope that maybe, despite my scattered path, it was going to come together to something good, and luckily it did. And you kind of have a similar experience. So
Yeah.
would you say that the pediatric feeding part or the inclusion part kind of just expanded from the pediatric piece? You found that you were working with that age group and then it sort of spilled over into doing other things with that particular age group, or what's the distinction there for you?
Yeah, I think it's all kind of merged together. I don't know if there's
Yeah.
a distinction. I think that I was always interested in feeding, not as necessarily my primary thing, but I realized over the years how big it is that it's enough
Yeah.
to be all that I do. But I mean, I still work just in kind of early intervention and just general development, caregiver coaching and support. And I think that like it's interesting thinking about mealtime. Mealtime is so indicative of like everything, right? Like if you look at a mealtime with a family, you see all the skills, you see the parent child or caregiver child
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
You can see where things are not going well or where things are going well. So I always tell people like for anything, whether you're supporting feeding a mealtime or not, like just watch a 20-minute mealtime and you will learn so much about a family. So I think it just like all meshes really nicely.
So I have two clarifying questions just for our listeners of things that you had talked about. So you said that when you first got into the feeding side of things that you felt like it was a little too behavioral, which I think I know what you're talking about and it makes sense to me, but I'm not sure the listeners know exactly what you mean. So can you elaborate on when you say it was too behavioral, what you mean by that? Or there are
Yeah,
other approaches outside of behavioral approaches?
that's right. Okay, yeah, great
We
question.
could probably talk the rest of the time on this question.
We probably could, but I'll try
We
to give
probably
it
will.
broad.
No, we probably will. Go ahead.
Sure. So I guess I always start like when I'm teaching on this topic now by just asking folks to imagine like what it takes to eat, right? And like so many of us, like I don't have any problems with mealtime. I love mealtime. I don't have problems with chewing or swallowing or
Hmm.
the social aspects. But if you think of all the things that come into taking a bite, chewing and swallowing even, we need to make sure that our oral motor skills work well. So if somebody can't use, this is beyond ABA, right? Of which is, I
Hmm.
guess, the
Hmm.
question. But if somebody can't use their tongue to move things around because they have low tone, for example, and that's kind of like where my expertise ends. I just knowing these other parts. But if they can't move food around, then feeding becomes really scary and unpleasant, and every single bite might hurt or might feel scary, like they're going to gag or choke. And so that's just one example. There's also like the sensory parts, the relational parts. If I'm not sure what is expected of me, like if I think of like traveling and eating at meal times where maybe different utensils are used or we eat on the floor or just like all these different norms. And if I don't know what's expected of me, my appetite changes. I don't want to eat. I'm looking around and trying to figure it out and observe. And so I have to have those skills too, like those observational learning skills and the social skills. And so if just one thing in that process isn't working, like n- making, like bringing it all down to refusal behavior is just completely losing all of that, like all of those other pieces. So like if I do an FBA on food refusal, it kind of makes me laugh, honestly, because like if I do an FBA on feeding and the kid's refusing to eat food, like what's my function? What am I going to get out of it? Like we all know it's going to be
Escape,
escape
right?
and avoidance, right? So like we have to ask another like, but why? Why are they escaping? Because it's scary, because it hurts, because they have lung issues or like breathing issues, and we have to be able to breathe while we eat. And this is a child maybe that was born premature and never learned that. And so they're like literally like I've seen kids who struggle to breathe and turn like their color changes and it looks scary. So we can't just be like, okay, but first take a bite and then you get reinforcement when we haven't worked on let's make sure that it feels comfortable. And so that's where all these other fields come in, like the folks that work on oral motor, the folks that work on the sensory piece, like bringing food, like hand-eye coordination, bringing food to the mouth, gastroenterologists, pulmonologists. There's so many people that work on this, and I think that we owe it to the families we work with to understand that there's so many reasons why the escape.
One last, so thank you so much. I think that really clarified. One other just clarifying question for what you asked for our audience. So you said that you kind of got, I don't know, disenfranchised by the whole methodologies, or that the way that people were approaching eating, you didn't like the interventions at the time. I think is kind of how can you speak to the interventions that were being used at that time and why you didn't like them? And then I'll
Sure.
pass it to you,
No,
because there's
that
a
was
lot
good.
we want to talk
Yeah.
about, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands exactly what you were talking about.
In a sense, maybe, do you want to describe escape extinction in the way
That
that,
works too.
that you observed it, and then I think that might give a really good overview to anybody listening as to why that probably
Yeah.
looks terrible.
Or
It-
other
it usually does,
methodologies.
yeah.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, well, escape extinction, and I'll describe kind of like what I was trying to do, which was, so, I mean, there was an escape extinction component, but maybe not to the point that like what we think about with the literature on escape extinction. But the conferences I was going to, the videos that were being shown were like, baseline, little child in a high chair, food presented in front of them, and they're, like turning their head and spitting and pushing the spoon away. And then the intervention is the escape extinction is that the food it remains there, and the only way they can move on and get out of the high chair and end the meal is to take the bite. So that's the only way to remove the spoon. So, and of course, like combined with other things, shaping, like differential reinforcement, it's not just escape extinction,
Sure.
but
And you say the only way they could get out of the high chair is to take the bite. How long did some of your more challenging clients wait out for before they?
so I personally never did that version of
Okay.
it. But I did do like kind of a first then. So sure, we can be all done, but first we're going to like take a bite of this one, and then we've got our, gosh, I hate saying this, but I'm going to say it to like in the interest of transparency. First we're going to take a bite of this, then we got our favorite food, our M&M or whatever, and then we're going to take a bite of this next food, and then we get our M&M, and they like cried their way through it, didn't even want the M&M at the end, they just wanted to be done. And that did take, I mean, it did take, I don't know how long, like more than your typical meal just to get those 5 bites or exposures in. I didn't last very long doing that because it just didn't feel good.
Okay.
There was a second part of that question.
No, the question was just, you said that you didn't really like the interventions that were being used, or you felt that they were traumatizing. So I was just asking for you to kind of explain what those interventions were so the audience could know. So maybe when we talk about the ones we're using now, they can juxtapose that. So what were you
Sure.
running away from? You were running away from like the more blanket escape extinction of, I'm going to wait until you do this kind of thing? Or what were you running away from?
Yeah, the kind of pressure to eat. And I kept picturing like, what if somebody did this to me? And if it was a food that, and I again ask people like, you guys can do this exercise if you want, but like, I think about a food that disgusts me, and disgust is a real thing. So do you have one?
I can't. So I was already thinking about this. I can't do raw oysters, and I'm sorry because I know that's going to offend a lot of sensibilities out there.
I don't
But
like
if I
raw
think
oysters
of
either.
dropping one in my mouth, like I see people do, just the idea of having it sit there for even a tenth of a second before I swallow this whole, I can't. I'll gag right now. Just
Yeah, that's
eat.
how I get
Yeah.
too. Yeah. And so I started thinking about that.
Kaylee's
Like,
like that.
Yeah.
Is there another one?
Oh, my
No, no.
girlfriend hates raw oysters as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I do too. I really want to like them and I have tried and I cannot. But thinking about that, like I would think about, you know, what if it was something like that for me? Like my parents, I am Russian and for some reason we like had a lot of like slimy pickled mushrooms. Like I like mushrooms, but not those. But even just thinking about that, like I'm able to say, no, I don't want it. That's not my preference. And I felt bad. Like I felt bad that I wasn't teaching kids that they can have those preferences too. I'm like, why am I choosing, why are we doing this food? Why are we forcing this? And how would I feel? I would say, forget the M&M, forget the chocolate. I don't want it because I feel gaggy. Like you don't, if you're thinking of that raw oyster and picturing eating it, and I'm talking about your favorite food, it's not going to it's not going to make the gag or the disgust go
That's a
away.
great point, right? I love chocolate, but I'm not going to necessarily enjoy it after I've had the oyster experience.
Will you eat oysters if it's first oysters, then Casa Gabriela? Will you do it?
No.
Oh, okay.
There's a good restaurant here that Dan just experienced, but anyway, continue.
That's awesome. The last big talk I did, Hoosier ABA, I decided to try something new and it worked. But I had pickled pig's feet.
Oh,
And
oh
I
man.
had audience members come up and like I paid one to, I was like, how much could I pay you to eat this? And some people said like, hundreds, $1 million. I'm not touching that. And somebody else was like, I would do it for $5. I was like, okay, we can do that. And so she did it. I gave her the $5 and I was like, okay, are you going to do it again now? She's like, no, I didn't like it. It's like, exactly. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't, it just reinforcement the way that it might work for teaching other skills doesn't work in this like very different context.
Wow. So many cool things
Yes.
that you just said there. One thing that you sort of keep alluding to, if and I think I'm interpreting it correctly, I guess one question that comes out is, what percentage of parents sitting in a pediatrician's office do you think are there for some sort of feeding, eating reason? And then where are pediatricians actually equipped for this, knowing that the general system is set up to, oh, they'll grow out of it. We're waiting until it's this huge problem to then refer to a specialty, and then you'll have to wait for that specialty a few months. And then by the time your kid walks in that door, to use your verbiage, we're down to the Lucky Charms or marshmallows or, something that the parent is going crazy over every night. But this is the only thing they eat. So I'm going to keep feeding them this thing. So
Have you
how
ever had
common
Lucky
are
Charms?
these challenges?
Have you ever had Lucky
I've
Charms
had Lucky Charms.
marshmallows?
The only reason to eat Lucky Charms
Okay,
is
just
the
making sure.
marshmallows.
All right.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And they make the milk all pink and stuff. Anyway.
With the sugar milk at the bottom? Okay,
That's
just making sure.
Yeah, you throw the other stuff out there. Those little, whatever they are, alphabets. Throw those
Yeah.
those things out of there. But
I
how
would have to,
common?
like, catch my kids. No, you can't dig for the marshmallows. And then I go in and dig for the marshmallows.
Right, exactly.
Those are for adults. Mommy's marshmallows. Those are mommy's marshmallows.
Lucky Charms. Yep, all of those cereals. How common are these difficulties across the board? And then where do they end up, on that more tail end of the normal distribution where they're really, really challenging? I know I'm giving you a very general question there, but
Yeah.
I know you can answer some semblance of that.
It's a really hard question, and like researchers have tried to understand prevalence. As far as like a diagnosable pediatric feeding disorder, the prevalence is estimated 1 in 36 or 37, something around that, of all kids. Then you take kids with developmental disabilities, kids who are born premature, and that it skyrockets that
Yeah.
prevalence. But because we don't have, I mean, it's such a new field and we don't have very clear definitions nor like a line for where it switches from typical to clinical.
Interesting.
And I don't think we should have the line. I think we should just like, as soon as somebody says, I don't know how to do this, we should support them. Actually, before that, we should
Yeah.
just be preventatively giving them that information. But that makes it really hard because pediatricians, from what I'm learning and talking to my brother who's a primary care provider, they don't learn anything about
Right.
pediatric feeding disorder. One, because it's newer, and two, because they have so many other things. And so they've got it like, one of you mentioned kids, right? You've probably gone through does one of you have kids too? You okay?
I live
So
vicariously through Mike's kids.
okay,
Even
so you
better.
also have three, Mike. But so you've
Yes.
been through this.
Yeah.
I do as well. And so you go to those well child checks, and
Yeah.
they
Yep.
say like they check in on like how's sleep going, what are they doing? And there's one question. There's one question that says, is your something along the lines of like, is your child eating a variety of foods, including fruits and vegetables? And I don't know, like people are either going to lie on that and say yes. They're going to be the small percentage of people whose kids actually eat a variety from the start, or they're going to say no. But then, and like I've said no for every single one of my kids, despite being in this field. It's just like that is a common thing, a common challenge, and it is a
It
slightly
is.
typical. But then when your pediatrician comes in, they're like, oh, like this is, I'm supposed to flag this. They don't really know what to do next. Like they'll ask some questions and that's where we hear some of that, like, this is really normal. It's okay. Like, let's add a multivitamin. Let's just make sure they're getting enough iron,
Mhm.
like just keep trying, keep presenting. There's all sorts of well-meaning advice. And for somebody like me, that's fine. Like I can figure that out. It's not stressing me out. But I've heard from so many clients that they hear that and then they're like, one mom story stands out in particular. She said they said he's fine. He's growing fine. It's normal. And then I went to the grocery store and I all of a sudden I'm like in tears over my groceries because I don't know what to buy him to like keep trying. And so, gosh, we could do so much by just giving that
Mhm.
information earlier, like 4 years before she's crying in the grocery store aisles. Um, so that question about like prevalence and how often it's
Yeah.
happening is I want to say almost always, but it's
Yeah.
so hard to say.
Well, and that's kind of what I was after. I think is for all of us to realize, like with kids, this is an overall common challenge, and even, I feel very fortunate with my 5-year-old, for example, who I would say eats just about anything, and then once in a while there's an evening where she's having trouble at dinner, and then my parent instinct kicks in. And I'm frustrated. How dare she? She always eats stuff. And now I'm worried about her not getting enough calories at dinner, even though she ate the rest of the day. All these little pressures, motivators, if you will, toward now forcing the issue as a parent, despite my better professional knowledge, right?
Right,
So now
right.
I'm creating this aversive experience, and dinner time isn't as fun as it used to be. And so now I'm saying this happens once every 2 weeks. Now to imagine
Right,
a parent
right.
who's facing this every single night, that's a lot. That is a lot
It's
for
like,
sure.
what is it? I counted it once. It's like hundreds of negative experiences in a month. I have the number somewhere where I was like, how
Oh,
many times per
wow.
day and then per week and then per month our families dealing with this? And it's interesting that we support it so little because it's the one thing as parents that we cannot skip. Like everything else, we can be like, okay, we're not going to do summer camp. We're not going to do toileting, whatever. We'll just keep them in pull-ups until they're ready. Okay, we'll
Oh,
co-sleep.
goodness.
We're not going to do anything about that. We can't not feed our kids. We can't skip it. We can't not worry about it because
Yeah.
it's like I mean, it feels sometimes like not to be dramatic, but it does feel like life or death sometimes. Like if I don't
Oh, it's,
feed my kid dinner, if they go
yep.
to bed hungry because they were having a rough time, like I'm not going to sleep well because I'm going to be
Yeah.
like, are they going to like are they going to be ill? Did I mess them up? Right. So
Well, and they,
it is-
they could get hangry, right? You might end up with a child who's now agitated because they're hungry or they're not going to sleep well. So, yes, I mean, I think that we borrow that worry, and then as parents, we've experienced that. So we're also worried because, hey, this could happen. You mentioned something, and I think you explained it pretty well, but I think it's important to think about a pediatrician who's now, say, tracking height and weight on percentile. And you're a parent, you're like, oh, they're tracking just fine here, so there must not be a problem. And that's kind of outside of the question you mentioned. Are they eating enough fruits and vegetables? I
right.
think that's about it. I think that's all that any given pediatrician, again, with all due respect, those are the questions they need to know. Where does that tracking on the height and weight? How is that misleading to the rest of what you're seeing? How does that not actually speak to a potential problem, despite those two metrics being okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that question. And also want to plug here the organization Feeding Matters. I'm involved with them as a volunteer on their conference committee and other initiatives, but they just had their international conference and the keynote was beyond the growth chart, like what are all the other
Nice.
measures to be thinking about? And they had some folks with lived experience of ARFID diagnoses who spoke to this issue too. So the growth chart is like it's so outdated, and it's kind of funny too because they are taught to, like, if they're following their trajectory on the growth chart, we're okay. But they don't really, because they're not registered dietitians. I mean, they can't
Mm,
be everything. So they can't dig into, like, well, what are they eating to stay on the growth chart? And I guarantee you, like, I could keep my kid on the growth chart with goldfish crackers and milk.
Lucky Charms.
But yeah. And that's what folks with
Yeah.
Lucky Charms.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what folks with ARFID are telling us, that, like, when we're hearing I was above the growth chart, nobody was worried about my survival, but like my nails were brittle, my hair was falling out, I didn't didn't have any nutrients, I didn't feel good, and everybody said I was growing fine. And so it misses so much, unfortunately. And like in my magic world, I would say that in addition to our well child visits, that everybody would have access to a registered dietitian
Mm.
preventatively to like plan and make sure that that is something that, like, is part of that conversation of, like, what are we eating?
One thing really
Yeah.
quickly, I'm going to pass it to you because
Yeah,
I know
go ahead.
I've been hogging this
No,
up,
no,
right?
I just got one.
You mentioned something very important about hair and nails, and then now maybe I'm having behavioral issues. How much of that is correlated, would you say? And again, I know I'm asking you a huge question, but just kind of speak in generalities. Some of those behavioral issues might now then be actually related to a general, not feeling well. And then we're using the same motivational contingencies to address those behavior issues, though they're not, or they're now related to something that we shouldn't be using those contingencies for anyway. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but it's
Yeah, yeah,
almost like
yeah.
we're 4 degrees of separation from our actual science now, and we're just kind of plugging this in. And again, the contingencies are important, but we're kind of missing the mark on the general problem in that sense. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, everything. Again, like, I don't know the numbers on the research, but like from an intuitive, like, human perspective, if you think about any time that you've been ill and how it changes your appetite,
Sure.
anytime that you missed a meal and how that changes your sleep, or like when you just like the when you eat too much of the something that is not what your body needs, how you
Mm,
feel sluggish, right? Like all of the things. So when I'm sluggish, I have more refusal behaviors, right? Like, and so intuitively it just makes sense. So it's interesting to me that we're not like talking about it like just were, but
I think the
um
technical term for that is being hangry.
yeah, being
right.
hangry, yes.
It's a medical term.
Yes. I have one of my kids, when he's hangry, he also is like very much like, I'm not going to do anything you say. So like we have to like trick him into thinking it's his idea to eat. And like I like literally leave things around him until he finally eats. And then we're like, my husband and I are like, oh, thank goodness. Like, but we have to get ahead of it. And he has all sorts of behavior challenges if we miss that piece. Like we have to be constantly feeding this kid snacks so we don't get to that point. But if again, this is like where boiling it all down to this idea of refusal behavior,
Mhm.
inappropriate mealtime behavior is completely missing the mark, because then we don't know. Like you said, it's all connected.
So we miss on the function in many ways. The refusal's correct. The why is the part that we're not equipped to be well informed.
Yeah,
And
you need one
yeah,
more why.
yeah, not yet, not yet. Okay.
So you mentioned RFID a few times, and I want to have you maybe open up a little bit on that. One of the families that I worked with became pretty big advocate into the feeding community, if that's the right term. Her child was very aversive to eating. You actually
Yeah.
were the supervisor, and maybe you can speak more to it if you'd like, because you know more than I do. I know she got this diagnosis of RFID, so maybe you could speak to what the diagnosis is, and she felt that it was game changing for her. I'm not sure why getting the diagnosis would be game changing, because you could probably do the same interventions with and without the diagnosis, but very ignorant to the eating scene. So can you maybe speak to the diagnosis of RFID, what it is, and why it might be beneficial to people to receive it?
Yeah, yeah. So there's two different feeding diagnoses. So maybe I'll just like kind of go over both because
Please.
it's helpful. So before ARFID, like there's the pediatric feeding disorder diagnosis is a medical, like an ICD diagnosis.
Mm.
And that is looking at four domains. So like your skill, your nutrition, your medical, and your psychosocial. And that is more like what I see more with PFD is kids who are born premature and have like a very clear medical reason for their feeding difficulties. ARFID is a DSM diagnosis. It stands for avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And it's probably more of like the profile we see with autistic folks we work with. So it's maybe like limiting the variety, it's feeling nervous about anything new or change, like some of that. I'm using terms that are in the diagnostic criteria, but
Sure.
I don't love the word like rigidity. It's preferences, but feeling very specific, like I don't feel safe unless I have my food this way. And it's so like I said, it's in the DSM, but it's not like a body image eating disorder.
Okay.
But it does impact psychosocial functioning. And so you could have both PFD and RFID. You could have PFD that leads to RFID. So like imagining that like kind of what I talked about earlier, if we have like premature baby who never learns to like coordinate their breathing and their eating, and feeding becomes really scary, and then they become really avoidant and restrictive with their intake and have that psychosocial impact, they could have both diagnoses. And honestly, like there's still a lot of discussion in the feeding world about what's what and do we need to, and some people don't believe we do, and so like there's still a lot of discussion. So all that to say is we don't fully know. I do know that folks are appreciative of the ARFA diagnosis because it makes it feel like it's not their fault, right? Like this is real. This is in my body. I'm not choosing this. And I think it makes it easier for them to explain to others, like, I have this condition. Like this is something, it's like, you know, being born with some other sort of difference. I
Sure.
don't have a good example, but it makes it easier to and like it almost gives like an identity to it. So I think that's why we're seeing folks appreciate.
I know
So,
this parent definitely did. With my ABA brain, it kind of seemed like a circular diagnosis, right? So the child didn't want to eat, so they got the diagnosis of ARFID, which says the child doesn't want to eat. So it kind of became circular. I didn't know if there was anything like deeper than that, of like maybe giving access to certain things or any further explanations that diagnosis provided, besides the fact of just like this child wants to avoid certain things. Like I was trying to wrap my head around why this diagnosis was so beneficial to the family, but maybe it's the last thing you said, that it felt like it was no longer purely their fault. And even if
yeah.
it is circular, it gives them something to kind of attribute it to, and maybe more motivation to seek a therapy to reduce it.
Yeah, and there's a ARFID specific intervention out there now. People are talking about it more. So personally, I work with a lot of kids who don't have a formal ARFID diagnosis, and if they went to pursue one, they'd probably get it. And nothing changes about the way I work with kids. It's still
Hmm.
kind of the same goals. But I just did a consult with a family a couple weeks ago, and the ARFID has become like a TikTok thing now. I don't know.
That's kind of, yeah, stuff
Of
like
course
that.
it has.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah. So like the
Everybody
mom
has
had
everything now.
they were feeling so frustrated with their 14-year-old son, and the mom came across ARFID on TikTok and started wondering like, oh, is this what it is? And we started talking about it, and he wasn't really wanting to talk at this point. He was on the call too, and then his dad kind of looked over and he's like, oh, he's looking up the ARFID diagnosis, and the kid kind of like brightened up, like he's like, oh, this kind of sounds like me, and
Mm.
just really seemed to benefit from this idea, like that again, he didn't do this, and like he can say something to his family when they're feeling frustrated because they thought that they presented a food exactly how he wanted, but they missed the mark in some way. It kind of like helps explain it, that like I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm not just doing refusal behaviors.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
This client that you worked with, I think you ended up having a fair amount of success, but I know this individual is very resistant. I don't know if you want to speak to, because you did cooking and all sorts of stuff with this individual.
Yeah. So I stayed away and wisely by the guidance of the parent. Initially, there was a feeding specialist and the OT, and there were a number of other very well-qualified professionals working on the eating part. So I was like, yeah, the ABA service doesn't need to touch that. You've got plenty of cooks in the kitchen, pun intended.
But
oh, should I do it? There it is. I had to do my little badum tisk there. And I came across one of the sessions where I was talking to the parent and realized that she had abandoned the other services because they weren't seeing much success. So I was like, oh, so maybe we can give it a shot. And admittedly, it was one of those moments where I was like, look, I'm not qualified to this. I'm going to take a completely behavioral approach. But my developmental brain told me, and along with the ABA part, just kind of told me that there was too much pressure around the idea of putting something in his mouth for eating. So I decided that we were just going to take that pressure away. But I knew that the child liked certain foods, like pizza. So I said, okay, we're going to deconstruct the pizza. So when he eats the pizza, he eats it as all one thing. And then I noticed that sometimes he'll pick the cheese and the pepperonis off. So we're going to make pizza. And I told the family, there's no press, there's no bastardization of Premack principle here. There's no pressure at all to eat it. Yep. We might model it as we cook and put things in our mouth. And we did that for several sessions. We called it food science. And we would talk about the states of matter and solids and melting and temperature and all that.
He was a really smart kid.
Yeah, super smart, super smart. Shout out to Pop Pop out there. He'll know. They listen. He'll know who I'm talking to. And it was by happenstance, and that was kind of my general aim. Again, I was out of my league here, but it was my kind of happenstance that by taking that pressure away, he might find himself like the rest of us who were modeling it, cooking and kind of popping things into his mouth. And that's kind of in general what happened. I haven't checked in as of late. I think that there was some success, and those things now led to, like, the child invited me over for a cheeseburger and things that we never thought would happen. I don't know how that's maintained, but that was my general notion, was kind of going, I bet there's a ton of pressure because I've done that in the past. If you touch it to your tongue, if you put it to your lips, I'll give you we'll have the negative reinforcement. You'll get to escape. So I knew, that was being done, whether by somebody else or whatever. I knew that was part of it. And again, it makes logical sense. And then there's everything else that you're mentioning that my instinct told me that we got to remove that pressure. And it worked. Again, real, shot in the dark there. But
well, no, I mean, again, intuitively it makes sense. And it's still explainable by behavioral principles what happened, right? Like,
yeah.
And I was just thinking, like, when I say, like, I read all the behavioral things and it wasn't working, like, I still believe in the science at play. I think it's just like a different way to apply it.
Yeah.
I think we're missing a little bit of information on the function, the why is there an avoidant or restrictive behavior? Why, right? I think that's, at least for me, when I hear you describe it, is not understanding enough of the physiology behind that from a behavioral perspective, because the rest of it is still, even swallowing is a behavior, chewing is a behavior.
Yep.
I think, at least I can admittedly say wholeheartedly, my understanding of those things is way limited.
Yep.
I mean, I know from a developmental perspective, I know from a personal perspective, but those specialists that you've had access to they know so much about the way your tongue works or the way your teeth, combine with your tongue. Speech language pathologist, oh my goodness, they know. They have a wealth of knowledge that we just don't have as BCBAs.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying the RFID. I think that really helps. The last thing I'll do, and then I'll pass it to you, Mike, is circle back. So you all were talking about the pediatrics piece and how the delay in service provision and maybe the fact that a lot of the pediatricians might not even know how to respond to eating abnormalities might lead to some difficulties and maybe resulting in Lucky Charms eating for 4+ years. That kind of opens up the door to your behavioral pediatrics piece.
Not mine.
not yours, but your
I'm
your
just
venture,
interested in it. Yeah.
your venture of what you want to do. So I don't know if you want to
Yeah, no,
speak
and
on that
I was
at all,
alluding
or
to that
pass
earlier
it
in
to
that
you.
question about, how common are these troubles, and then you sort of alluded to that. So where would you see, and Patrick Fryman has talked about this pretty extensively, but the idea that a pediatrician could be in consultation with a parent and child, learn about these challenges that might be more common than the rest of us, care to consider. Excuse me. And then instead of waiting for the problem to get bigger before then referring to the specialty, they were to then have on the way out, hit up the behavior analyst office, on the way out. Again, we're lacking a whole ton of information still. We'd have to get better. We'd have to go back and do some of the work you've done to really understand, not just about eating or feeding, but now things like enuresis and encopresis and, wetting your pants during the day, that's more common than people think if you look at the research. And the idea that a kid is, wetting their pants at school till they're age 12 because our medical system doesn't necessarily have the setup to address it earlier. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. What do you think of the general notion of that, or where could we fit in on the way out of the pediatrician's office to do a quick consult?
Oh, I love that idea. And I've always had that dream too. Like, I wish I could just like have a day a week at a pediatrician's office.
I'm trying so hard.
Are you? Oh. Yeah. So there's an initiative with Feeding Matters right now too about primary care provider education. And there was just a call for a research study where there's this kind of like this doesn't answer the question of like where does the BCBA fit in, or like somebody else fit in, but it's like before that prevention piece of what do they need to know to then be able to give the right kind of information. And so there's some modules that have been developed, and I don't remember actually who, maybe Children's Hospital of Atlanta, doing modules or doing some pre and post work to kind of see what does this do for primary care providers. So it's just like building knowledge everywhere. But then also, like, I think that they don't know what we can do as far as feeding support. And so I've been trying to connect with pediatricians and say, like, here, we can do just like the short-term consult just to get mostly working with parents, but like helping them understand how to respond to their children, how to set up a mealtime. And that's something I think all behavior analysts are capable of doing. We know about environmental arrangement. We know about, like setting up for success, how to give instructions, how to lower demands. We don't have to jump to that like escape extinction, but we can all be a source of knowledge if we're already working with kids, especially of setting up a mealtime routine that fits the context of the family without going into that, like, how do I chew? How do I swallow? We don't have to all know all the things. We can just like take our behavioral science and apply it to this and not just say like, oh, this is out of my scope, I'm moving on. I don't know if that answered your question. There's so many.
It does. It was again, I've been asking you these huge questions. I have a lot of respect for your work, so I trust you're going to add some. You're going to enlighten us.
I was just going to say, you keep using the term meal routine, which is something I think is important for people to hear. And I know you've been a big proponent of that, and talking about, even if you're talking about like gluten-free diets or whatever, just the fact that parents are aware of the child's diet, and now the meal becomes more of a routine, regardless of whether it's the gluten or not that they're consuming. The fact that it becomes more of a routine, I think you've been a big proponent of trying to make that more of a consistent routine, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're asking huge questions. Let me piggyback on that. What, in terms of routine, so I think what Dan's alluding to is in the past, I can think back now, 20 years in the advent of, say, GFCF diets, and me as a young professional kind of trying to understand all these things and knowing that, there was the quick judgment of but those aren't empirically validated. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Somebody's got an anecdote about it. It might have worked for them. Let's see what that means. And at that point in time, I came to the conclusion that whether it was the gluten-free or not, I would see families dive in head first with the parents and the rest of the family taking the lead. And then all of a sudden they were sitting at the table and they were consuming foods in common. And it was like, okay, was this the gluten-free foods or the fact that we've created such a routine around it, or both, which is wonderful, right? So I think maybe you kind of speak to that as a general premise. And then I would be interested in knowing, sort of the progression of those more specialized diets. where that gluten sensitivity maybe is a thing, where it isn't. What's your general feel on that?
I've been very removed from conversations about those like specialized diets, even in this work. So that's
That's a good
interesting.
thing. That's a good
I,
thing.
yeah, I think that like I've really been stressing individualization
Mm,
and the importance of building routines that fit the family's context.
yeah.
And so if that's part of that, then fine, that we can work with that, but or any specialized diet. But when I talk about mealtime routines, I'm more thinking about like before we're working on chewing and swallowing a new food, are we even like enjoying coming to mealtime together? Do we
Mm,
want to be there together? Or is this just like such a source of stress and pressure? And something I think that's a question that all BCBAs should
yeah.
ask of
Yeah.
like if feeding is an issue, like, well, tell me about your mealtime routine. Just like if sleep is an issue, we say, tell me about your bedtime routine. Like, let's go through it and find those pain points. And a lot of times I'll find things like, I know I'm straying from your question, but like this is where I'm at
Go
with
right
routine.
ahead, please.
A lot of times I'll find things like it's chaos at dinner time and nobody knows what, like who's doing what. And I mean, this is in my house too sometimes. And kiddo is like on their playing with their favorite Legos or on their watching their favorite show. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, dinner time. And we have to end this favorite routine and we have to come
Mm,
over. All behavior analysts
mm,
know what that is, right? Like we know how to break it down. We know how to put in like a more preferred item. We know how to make the table or wherever we're eating fun. And we know how to use pairing. Like that's what I mean when I'm talking about routines, is like just how can we build something where people can learn first?
yeah.
And so, yeah, with the specialized diets or anything like that, like that's such a small like the it's funny
Yeah.
because like what we're eating is such a small part of the routine for me, and then I build that in.
Okay, and I've got to stop Dr. Yev there, as this concludes the first part of our interview. Please do ensure you return for part 2 of our interview with Dr. Yev Veverka and
Always analyze responsibly.
ABA on Tap is recorded live and unfiltered. We're done for today. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. See you next time.